Here we go. And now we're recording. Thanks, Sean. And we have a question in chat about the note catcher. It's actually just right above your comment in the chat. There's a link, and looks like Janet will pop it in there again. We'll pop that in from time to time. So we encourage you to introduce yourself there. Before we move into more introductions, I do want to talk about the one book norms. And Janet, you might want to go ahead and share your slide deck. I think the one book norms are listed there. So we just have 3 group norms or expectations for this event and for all of the One Book, One Boulder events. So the first one is, as I mentioned earlier, listen to and amplify marginalized voices. If you identify as Black, Indigenous, or a person of color, we invite you to put an asterisk before your questions and comments so we can be sure to give marginalized voices a chance to speak and be heard. The second is hold space and give grace. To the best of your ability, ask questions that will lead to your own greater understanding, while also making sure to leave space for others to speak, share, and understand. Ask yourself if you are stereotyping, underestimating, or insulting a fellow community member. And when listening, give others grace and compassion. We will all stumble and make mistakes as we grow. And I want to just illustrate that concept of holding space and giving grace from one of the books that we'll be talking about today. This is Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram X. Kendi, with pictures by Ashley Lukashevsky. And there is a spread in this book that demonstrates that need for space and grace. It's right here, and it says, confess when being racist. And the images we have here are of a child learning to walk. And all of us are learning how to talk about race, how to be more inclusive and to come together. And so here we have a child who is toddling along and whoops, I slipped, I fell, I lost my balance. And so this is a wonderful metaphor for the times when we may use the wrong words or be insensitive in some way. And so we apologize, we confess, we pick ourselves back up, and we keep on going. So I think that's a wonderful illustration for hold space and give grace. And then number 3 is simply that racial slurs will not be tolerated. So again, for folks who have joined us, we want to remind you that we are encouraging this to be a very interactive workshop. You are welcome to put comments into the chat. You are welcome to put comments into our note catcher. There is a link in the chat to that note catcher. That's a nice place for confidential kinds of communication. So it's just, if you're not feeling it and you don't want really everybody to see your name along with the comment that you're making, just pop it into that note catcher instead. So again, welcome. My name is Krissy Jensen. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm a youth services specialist at the Boulder Public Library. Today we have as our guest Janet Damon, who is a librarian, educator, and literacy consultant. We also have Melanie Borsky Howard, a dear coworker and beloved storytime leader here at the Boulder Public Library. And we have you. And we're very interested to know who's here. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the note catcher. You can let us know maybe what brings you here, what interests you about our topic, and you know, what your connection is to children's literature, parent, caregiver, etc. Thank you for showing that, Janet. So here's our agenda for today. We're going to start with Janet. She'll be talking about race awareness in children, kind of giving us that context to understand where children are in developing race awareness and what the experience is like depending on what kind of exposure they receive. Then we will move into some practical stuff. I'll do a little demonstration of some books that you can use to talk about race with babies and toddlers. And then we'll have our first breakout session. We'll come back after that, and Melanie will present on some contemporary and classic picture books talking about inclusivity. She's going to do a beautiful read aloud for us. We'll have a second breakout session to reflect on what Melanie has shared, and then we'll all come together again for final reflections. So I think it's about time for us to move on into Janet's talk. Janet is an educator, librarian, and literacy consultant, and she's currently library services specialist with the Denver Public Schools. We are so thrilled to have her, as Melanie and I have been meeting with Janet to plan this workshop. We have just been blown away by how eloquent she is, by the insight that she shared with us. So without further ado, Janet, please, you may begin.
Thank you so much. I just appreciate the space. I'm so excited to see everyone gathering here to talk about these important issues. And so I'm going to ground us first in a land acknowledgement. And this comes from Gracie Redshirt Tyron, and she is the American Indian Services Director, and she runs the Center for Identity and Inclusion at CU Denver. So as we gather here today, we honor and acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories and ancestral homelands of the Cheyenne and Arapaho nations. This area was also the site of trade, hunting, gathering, and healing for many other Native nations: the Ute, Lakota, Kiowa, Comanche, Apache, Shoshone, and many more. We recognize the indigenous peoples as the original stewards of the land and all of the relatives within it: the animal nations, plant nations, insect nations, and stone nation. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties these nations have to their traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. Let us acknowledge also the painful history of genocide and forced removal from this territory. We respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather. We pay our respect to them and give thanks to all tribal nations as the ancestors of this place. Next, I'm going to show you this image, and this image is a traditional ceremony that is practiced on the very first one-year birthday of newborn children in Korea. And so on their first birthday, during this ceremony, Daljabi, the children are placed in front of several artifacts. Some represent a life of a scholar. Some represent the life of a musician or a writer or a judge or an artist. And in this ceremony, what it acknowledges is the indwelling intelligence that children have, the wisdom that they bring forth, even at the very youngest ages, and that we want to affirm and honor that indwelling wisdom. And so what we'll be talking about tonight is talking about the strengths that our youngest babies and our littlest ones bring, and how we can continue to affirm and support some of these characteristics while also helping to ensure that they are equipped for a world that is diverse and that has so many unique and beautiful identities. So first, in the chat, I want you to just think, and if you prefer to put it in the chat, or you can also drop it into an empty space in a note catcher, what are some feelings that arise when we think about talking about race with our child? And here is where I'll ask just for my colleagues to just kind of, as we drop some things into the chat, we'll uplift and share out some of the feelings that come with talking about race with our kids. All right. So I see some things in the chat. Can I invite Melanie or Krissy to just unmute and just share some of those responses?
Yeah, it looks like we're seeing anxiety, responsibility. I actually wrote, I'm afraid I won't say the right thing or I'll use the wrong terms. Uncertainty if the child will understand. Unsure if what I'm saying is correct, inclusive and caring. I'm a lot of not sure what to say, if they understand what I'm saying.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you all for just, you know, being vulnerable and radical vulnerability in the space to just acknowledge that these are our feelings. What we're going to see here is that during a workshop, the Sesame Street Identity Matters study surveyed 6,000 parents. And what they found is that only 10% report that they often talk to their children about race or identity, and that 28% sometimes talk about it. But what we see is that over 60% of parents rarely ever discuss race or ethnicity or even social class with their children. And what happens is that even though we're not talking about it, we also see that folks are experiencing negative remarks being made about their race or religion, and that 46% of Muslim parents and 40% of Black parents and 32% of Asian parents say their child has heard at least one negative comment about their race or religion. And this shows how important this is, but at the same time that we may feel that it is a taboo subject to talk about, or we don't feel like we have exactly the right tools to have a healthy and affirming and positive conversation with our child that recognizes race. I think of this quote that Audre Lorde has given us, that it's not our differences that are dividing us, it's our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences. And so one of the things, I'm gonna take us into the chat again, and I want you to think about it. Why? What is your why for wanting to talk about race with your child? What is the driving feeling or the hope that you have that leads you to want to have rich and important conversations with your children about race and identity? And then.
Well, and Janet, I love that Donna said, at age 5, my daughter internalized that her life would be really hard because she has darker skin and is female. I thought that was a good point, that she gets emotional to feeling her struggle.
Yes, when we think about what it means for our children to navigate this and to be in a world that still struggles with our color, our hair, our skin tone, our hair texture, and that even within communities of color, that colorism is still something that, you know, there's codes of silence around when we talk about this. So that's powerful that that's an experience she's having. But then also, how do we as parents provide this protective and powerful, rooted in self-love and in the beauty of what our skin color brings to our lives? Is there any other comments that we want to uplift real quick?
Education is key to understanding. My grandchildren will feel free to talk to me when they have questions. Understanding racial inequality. I want to internalize that the idea that people's differences make the world a richer place. I think that our younger children are far more open than our 20-year-olds. My sons were raised in a very white town. I want my child to honor and appreciate the richness we bring through our diversity.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That is exactly what we're going to go into now. When we think about what our young people and what the research tells us about our very youngest children and how they can arrive and how can they be equipped for some of these conversations. In a University of Toronto study, what they did is they studied 6 months old, and they found that babies have a preference for members of their own race and sometimes a bias against members of different races. And this findings, from Dr. Lee, they found that race-based bias exists around the second half of a child's life, that they have this preference and this leaning towards the cultures and racial identities that are surrounding them. And that this is important because what we think about is we think that people have either a negative experience, maybe racially, that leads them to have a bias, but that instead we see that these biases may show up very, very young, that children might see differences and recognize differences at a very early age. But at the same time, the Yale University's Infant Cognition Center, known as Baby Lab, shows that more than 80% of babies in this study, what they did is they had puppets and they varied the colors of the puppets, the hair textures of the puppets, the clothing of the puppets, but they had one puppet that was demonstrating good behavior, like helping and being kind, and then one that was being taking the other puppet's things, making the other puppet cry. And what they found was that even at 3 months old, 87% of 3-month-old babies had a preference for the puppet that was being kind. And so Paul Bloom, who's the author of Just Babies, The Origins of Good and Evil, says these can show us that we have a rudimentary sense of justice at even the youngest ages, that somehow biologically we recognize goodness and we recognize when someone is acting in kind ways. And as parents, we see this all the time. Our children, as an educator, no one can tell you about injustice like a kindergartner. They see it, they recognize it, they know when they see something fair, and they know when they see something that's not fair. And we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to ensure that children are continuing to grow this praxis around being fair and being just and being equitable, rather than teaching them to rationalize some of the harms they may see in the world by offering up kind of a rationale for it. So I'm gonna go a little bit into also.
Janet?
Yes.
Molly asked, do the biases get embedded with a kid's parents?
Well, we can imagine that parents that, when you think about parents who have a wide social network and a wide social circle that includes people of many different ethnicities and many different racial and religious backgrounds, that children will see these faces more normalized in their home and in their family. And they're also taking cues from the ways that parents are interacting with others. Children are very sensitive to what they see parents modeling. So partially because children have such a strong mirror neuron network, that the behaviors they see in terms of small micro behaviors. So if a child sees that their parents shelter them or turn them away from, certain groups of kids when they're playing, or that parents avoid, certain cultures or certain backgrounds. And sometimes because maybe the parent is just uncertain and they just feel maybe that they don't want to model a poor interaction. But what we see is that only reaffirms to a child that there are some groups of people that are different, and what we do with differences is that we avoid them or we limit contact. And so I think that what we see is that children learn early on, especially when, as a parent, a child might ask about color and about race and about why is this person different, or why does this person have darker skin than me, or why is this person have lighter skin than me. And when we kind of clinch up and we're like, this is such an awkward, they pick up on those physical cues that we're giving them. And what they're kind of learning is that you don't ask about it. You don't engage in that conversation. And we really don't want to do that. We really want to affirm that these are physical characteristics, and everyone has many different physical characteristics. And that does not give us information about who that person is. It doesn't give us information about their likes and dislikes, their hopes and their dreams. And so that is something important that we have to think about, is the kinds of relationships that we're modeling for our children in terms of intercultural and interracial friendships and relationships. Does that help? Okay, perfect. I'm gonna go into a little bit of what kinds of ways that this can have a physiological reaction for our children. So when we think about the ways that we are feeling and experiencing microaggressions, macroaggressions, when we are experiencing othering and not belonging, that these actually have, the way the brain processes pain, there was this groundbreaking kind of study done where they see that social pain actually overlaps the same systems that physical pain does. So when they've done studies where, for example, in one study, they did neuroimaging of people playing a game, and there was one person who the ball was never thrown to. And so that person, in their brain, it highlighted the same places that a physical punch to the gut might highlight. And so belonging is so intrinsic to the human experience that being set aside and set apart and being excluded can have physical ramifications, and it actually causes there to be a pain response. And that pain response is over the same systems that process physical pain. And so when we think about what is at risk when we do these practices of othering, and when people feel they don't belong and they feel they're not included, that it's causing harm. And this harm is something that, you know, when we think about the way that American Pediatrics Association has identified racial biases and racial discrimination in our country as being one of the impacts to the health of children, these are kind of the studies that they're looking at, is that it's causing the stress response, it's causing an emotional response, and that actually decreases our mental health and mental well-being. So we're gonna get into some positive practices that are gonna help us ensure that we're not doing this to any children, but the power of belonging cannot be underestimated. Belonging is a critical human social need that we all have. In this next slide, I just have a little mini toolkit that I wanted to make sure everyone has. And this has links to the study. This is the statement by the American Academy of Pediatrics around you know, racial justice as being important for the health and well-being of our children. This Harvard Business Review talks a little bit about the pain and connectivity response and the studies that they were used for that. There's also a link to Freedom Reads, which is an anti-bias book talking website, and it has lots of different books, and again, modeling what is going to be modeled here for you tonight. This is also the study done by Sesame Street, and so you can look more into some of the links. I know some of the images were small. You might not have been able to read the fine details. This is also the American Indians in Children's Literature. And so this has, Dr. Debbie Reese has lists of what are the kinds of incredible stories and books that we should be putting in front of our children to introduce them to our Native American cultures and our indigenous nations. And then this is a link to the Boulder, I'll just show you that one real quick. This is the racism and anti-racism picture book list. And so that might be super useful tonight as after this session is over. Embrace Race is a wonderful website full of resources around how to talk with your children about race in an affirming and brave about race way, with resources and then action guides. They also do wonderful webinars. And then the Greater Good Science Center talks about the practices of mindfulness and how that can actually, a 10-minute practice around mindfulness can give us some tools so that before we go into an implicit bias loop, which is kind of what happens when we're unconsciously moving through our day, but it gives us the space to learn how to pause, reflect, and ask ourselves what kind of story we are telling ourselves about people in our community. And then this is a link to the Boulder Foundation's, you know, oh, it might be the same one. I might have to change that one. And so I'll double check that one to make sure the website comes up. So I am going to pause there and stop sharing for a moment.
Janet, is the toolkit, is this page right here part of the toolkit? People are asking where we get these resources.
Yes, so this page here has links to every single tool. So every single website. So folks will be able to. So
you can click on the Freedom Reads and
yes.
It'll go to that website. You can click on the Sesame Street and it'll go to that web page.
Yep.
Got it.
Freedom Reads right here. And then you'll
got it.
Here is the links to the series and the YouTube channel. And so you'll be able to access all of these from this slide.
That's great. Thank you.
Perfect. Yes, I'm going to stop my screen share. And then I think we're going to get ready to see what how this might look as a practice. But I'm also going to just open up if there's any questions or anything. I know
Janet, there was a really interesting comment about the difference between working with children as an early childhood educator and working with your own child. That I thought was just really interesting there from Donna. Can you see that one?
Okay, let me look real quick. I think I'm like, I had 32 after I started. Okay, yes, okay. Yeah, well, you know what? I will say this. I definitely think sometimes when we're talking to, you know, children that we want to support as students, and we think about, you know, I think right here what you're unpacking is the colorism that is within our communities. And so if you just take a pause and Donna, I don't know if you want to unmute just to kind of share a little bit of, because that's a powerful experience that you are sharing there, but totally up to you. Do I hear you? Okay. Well, what I think about is when we think about colorism internally. So colorism, we have, you know, racial biases that occur in community, but we also have internalized racism that manifests as colorism in communities of color. And Donna, did you want to speak to that a bit? Or?
I think it's challenging. I work in a fairly diverse center in Boulder, and I have for 20-something years, and I felt like I've been educated in this and really careful and able to have those conversations. But then when it was like within my own family, I was just like, whoa, I wasn't really expecting it. And I grew up, you know, I remember being younger and not fitting in with my cousins or feeling like, oh, my skin's a lot lighter than theirs and struggling with that. And then having my daughter be on the other end of that was really challenging.
Yes.
And it brought up some of my personal things, which hadn't come out when working with children.
Yes.
You know, I was like, okay, I can support them and I can do all these things. And we do a lot of, we have a lot of conversations in my classroom around it. And, but then when it was like personal, I was like, whoa, and I just shut down.
Yes. You know what I think is powerful about that, Donna, is that when we think about it, one is that racism, internalized biases and the ways that colorism shows up in our families and communities is very painful. And it's painful over the course of our lives. And so I'll just share that in a workshop we did around colorism in communities of color, we had women from India, from Dominican Republic, from Mexico, from the Philippines, and Mexico, from Hispanic who had been here for 2 or 3 generations. And so the conversation, and also Jamaica, the conversation was so profoundly deep, the ways that, in fact, what we came out with was that it was passed down through the mothers to their daughters almost, of these ways that skin color made you either more acceptable or made you kind of, you know, the person in the family who was more isolated and othered in the family. And so I think one of the things that we can do when we have these conversations is that it's healing for all of us. It is healing for your grandchildren. It is healing for us to finally be able to give voice to some of the ways that we were harmed by bias and by, by racism and by colorism within our own families. But it also sets our children up not to repeat patterns that are coming through our own families around race and identity. And so I would say that those conversations are profoundly important. And I just thank you so much for uplifting that aspect of it in that nuanced way, because that's where the power of understanding how this impacts our lives comes from.
So Janet, this is Molly. And I too, looking at Donna, that, I'm kind of a Boulder girl. And I, golly, we're having these conversations at my job. and we're having these conversations as we are electing people to our leadership groups. And it, you know, you know, you know, what you were just commenting there about, I think about our role as women. I don't see a lot of men in this room. Our role here as women and providers, etc. About, you know, we have our kiddos, right? And, you know, and they're dealing with their own, you know, whatever school system. But then, you know, they've got their friends, and we've got our local communities. And I really struggle about how I can encourage my two sons to help. You know, I don't know if they're going to make a difference, but for them to just care, you know. So they're 29 years old, grew up in Boulder, you know, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, they care about all this stuff, but they certainly aren't actively involved. And I look for ways that I could get them to be more involved. And I would love to hear from all of you about how you know, they're not gonna, yeah, anyway, I'd love to hear from the group here.
Mm. Well, this I think is just what I will say. I think that the feeling that you have, that you want your children to not only be able to live side by side with people of various backgrounds and culture, but you actually want them to be compassionate and empathetic and actually be vocal in support of being a bridge and ensuring that our communities are safe. And I think this is going to be one of the conversations, Molly, that is so powerful that we'll come back to in the smaller group session. I just want to go ahead and turn it over to Krissy to model what she's going to model. And I think let's put this in the note catcher so that we can come back and think about how do we ensure that our children are engaged, right? That they're not just bystanders and not just watching, but they are engaging in this conversation.
Thank you, Janet, because, you know, they're the ones who are going to make a difference, right? Not us. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Molly, for that, as well as everyone else who's sharing. We're going to move into something that hopefully will be a little bit fun for you. Again, I'm Krissy. She, her, hers are my pronouns, and I'm a specialist at the Boulder Public Library. And I specialize in very early childhood, so birth to 3. And so I'm going to show you a few books and model a little bit about how I introduce concepts around race and around skin color and diversity in programs that I'll do with very young children, and talk about just a couple of suggestions maybe for what you might do. So I do want to come back, because I know that some of you are familiar with this book, to Anti-Racist Baby. It's a new one by Ibram X. Kendi with pictures by Ashley Lukashevsky. Ibram X. Kendi is the author of How to Be an Anti-Racist and Stamped. He actually, along with Jason Reynolds, made a version of Stamped that's for middle school, high school aged kids. So really, I can't think of the word I want, dynamic author. So with Anti-Racist Baby, this is a book that I think of as serving 2 different audiences. It serves, frankly, first and foremost, adults, so caregivers of very young children. This book gives us some guidance. It gives us some language. I saw in some of the chat people talking about how to be developmentally appropriate. So that's really, for me, what I love most about this book is that it really helps me to find the words and to feel comfortable talking about some tough issues, even with very young children. At the same time, this is clearly a book that we can use with young children. chances are that if I was using this, especially one-on-one, with a baby or a toddler, I probably wouldn't read much of the text. I would be talking about the pictures. So we've got a beautiful spread here that shows different families. So we have things that we can talk about here. We can talk about what's the same and what's different. And it's a way to get comfortable with helping children to notice skin color, to notice things that are the same, the things that are different. And as Janet mentioned in her presentation, just having that that verbalized acknowledgement that we have different colors of skin, we have different types of hair, and making that something that is normal and beautiful is huge. And you know, as we do this, we get more comfortable as well. And so then we can overcome that that phenomenon of the parents' biases being passed on to the children sensing that, oh, you're uncomfortable with this. So we got to practice. So here we can see that some families, like I see this family over here, they look like their skin color is pretty much the same color. The mommy and the daddy and the baby. I guess this is mommy and daddy, I'm not sure. And then some other families have skin colors that are different. This person's skin color is kind of like sandy colored. And this person's skin color is more like maybe cinnamon. So there's one thing we can talk about. We can talk about how, especially with babies, things like noses. Noses are an awful lot of fun. Look, there's a nose. Oh, this baby has a nose too. And so does this baby and that grown up. So again, we're getting comfortable talking about what we notice in facial features, for instance. I might show you one other spread in here. I think maybe actually, I know we're going a little bit long, so I think I'll just skip to the back. As is the case with a lot of children's books that I happen to like, in the back of the book, there are some guidelines for caregivers. And so this is huge. You're getting some wonderful guidance about how to talk about racism, how to talk about something that's not fair, how to talk about representation. He suggests that you ask your child, when you imagine a farmer or a teacher or an astronaut, what do they look like? And help your child to think about whether they are defaulting to the white expectation with certain jobs, for instance. So you'll get some really great ideas from the back of this book as well. So that's Anti-Racist Baby. I'm going to show you just one or two more. Let's see. I like your comment, Melanie. You have a nose, don't you? Okay. Okay, so here's a really simple example. Helen Oxenbury has fantastic books for using with very young children. They tend to be about 8 pages long. They are published in board format. So I highly encourage you to take a look at some of her books. This one is Clap Hands. They have very familiar images. Babies see other babies doing what they do. And so you can read this for fun. You can, the rhythm is really fun. And at the same time, you can stop and talk about these babies. Look at what these babies are doing. Oh, you do that too, don't you? And we can talk about how one child's skin is a certain shade and another child's skin is a different shade. So it's just very basic, simple, introducing the different qualities that we have that are just the visual. And at the same time, we're also developing a sense of commonality. So we're noticing those differences, and we're also seeing all the ways that that we all experience life and the kinds of everyday things that we do, and the everyday relationships that we have. Another beautiful example, Please Baby Please. This book is by Spike Lee and Tanya Lewis Lee. The pictures are by Kabir Nelson, an incredible illustrator as well as author. And I just love his work. So this is a gorgeous spread of 2 children in a family, and we can notice things about them, and we could even notice that, oh, so this is probably big brother or big sister, and this is the baby. And oh, look at their pretty hair. They have very curly hair, don't they? What's your hair like? My hair is kind of long and straight. It's not very curly. So just enough to give you a sense. This is not, it's not really all that challenging once you've seen somebody do it. One last example, A Kiss Means I Love You. This book is by Madeline Allen, with photographs by Eric Fulton, and babies love to see pictures of other babies. Photography is a really great, medium to use with babies. And one of the things that Janet pointed out to us when we were planning this is how that a book about feelings can be a really great book for leading into some discussions about issues around race. So we've got things that make us laugh. What makes you laugh? They're laughing together, aren't they? What do you think? Do you think maybe this grown-up is tickling this little person? Oh, and this baby says, a cry means I'm sad. Oh, yeah, when we feel sad, we cry, don't we? You know, what makes you feel sad? I wonder what made this baby feel sad. I feel sad when people aren't treated fairly. So there's an example. And Janet, would you like to say anything else about that?
No, I just love that's beautifully done. I just think that feelings, again, are just a great entry point to, it makes me happy when everyone has what they need. You know, it makes me feel sad when I see that, you know, some people aren't unhoused or don't have a home. Like just recognizing and unpacking that and modeling that we can name our feelings and name too what might, you know, be coming up for us when we see things that are happening that are unjust or that resonate with.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Janet. Okay, I think we are ready to go into breakout rooms. Do we have anything that we need to be sure we mention from the chat? Melanie, you might have been monitoring the chat a bit. Looks good. Okay. Let's go ahead then, and I'm going to set us up with some breakout rooms, and we can have a little private reflection about maybe trying to talk about race with very young children. So I will see how this goes. It's the first time I've done this, and I'm just going to create those rooms, and then Janet, me, Melanie, and our coworker Anne will make sure that each of us is in one of the breakout rooms just to kind of give you a little guidance. Here we go. How did your breakout rooms go, Anne? And yeah.
Yeah, we had a great discussion. It was
Okay,
just the two of us, but it went really well.
Okay, Janet, did it go okay for you?
Oh my goodness, I am grateful for the folks in the breakout room. It was a really, really great conversation.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear it.
We could have done one more conversation, but
I'm sorry I didn't post our prompts. I couldn't find them. I had them all ready before we started, but you know how it goes once you're live. Yeah, so I figured we are all pretty good at winging it. So thank you for helping with that. It looks like Melanie's back too. Was your group good?
Yeah, we had some great discussions. Just talking about being in the classroom and how to respond when kids do certain things, and just at those little tools and how they really rely on those little things that the caregivers say, that they hear those and they listen to them. So just that, I love, you know, the feelings, the emotions, like Janet was saying. I really like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm gonna pop some things into our note catcher that that I thought were especially valuable that in our breakout groups, and certainly invite everyone else to do the same. And
Oh yeah, Donna or Pat, if you could do that too, because I'm excited to read.
Yeah. And then when you're ready, Melanie, we're going to turn it over to you.
Yeah. I feel like being a child educator, I want to like do head, shoulders, knees, and toes and get some of the wiggles out.
That's actually not a bad idea.
I know. Shake your stresses out.
Let's all stretch a little bit.
Right. It's like,
look away from the screen. Oh my goodness, we're all looking at screens too much these days.
I love how Donna looks so relaxed. I love it when I'm reading to kids and they start like laying down or putting a blanket around them.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say before we get started?
What did you say? I didn't hear you, Melanie.
Janet, did you have anything to say before I get started?
Oh no, I'm excited. This is one of my favorite read alouds.
Yeah. This is a book that I've done very long that makes it easy to pattern skin and to talk about it, because she just makes it easy for us. We'll talk about this and then we'll get into some places where it's a little bit harder. This is called Parker Looks Up by Parker Curry. Illustrations are just wonderful. Parker Curry loves to dance. Dressed in her favorite tutu, she imagined she was a dancing queen. Isn't she beautiful? Look at her dark colored skin. My skin is white. Her skin is brown and it's so beautiful. But one rainy Tuesday, instead of going to dance class, Parker's mom said, let's go to the museum. Ava too. Parker loved visiting the museum almost as much as she loved twirling and leaping in the air. She pulled on her boots. Mom and her sister Ava buttoned up their jackets. Have fun, girls. Bye, Dad. And off they went. Splashing and smiling and, oh, whoa, look where they're going. Surprise! Gia, Parker's best friend, greeted them from the top of the museum steps. Yay, it's Gia. Oh, isn't it fun meeting friends? Once inside, the friends turned down a long hall looking at the paintings all around them. Wow, they saw prancing horses, blooming flowers, a bushy mustache, and a shiny jeweled necklace. They saw 2 peacocks with red eyes and a basket of slimy fish. Ew! And feathers. Lots and lots of brilliant feathers. Look at all these different skin tones and the beautiful, beautiful headdresses. Wow, that is brilliant, isn't it? Hurry up, Ava. When Gia spotted a playroom and raced ahead, Parker charged after her. Explore, let's make silly faces. After Gia struck purple hair onto the easel and Parker added a pirate hat and sunglasses, it was time to go home. I like to make silly faces too, don't you? Time to go, girls. Skipping down with the girls spied a row of frilly white tutus. Parker raised her arms. Gia spun around and around. Wait for me, Parker, called dancing after her friend until Parker Curry looked up. She froze in her tracks, spellbound. A portrait of First Lady Michelle Obama loomed before her. She had rich brown skin, just like Parker, and kind of familiar eyes that reminded Parker of her mother, of her grandmother, her sister, and yes, even herself. How could someone look so real and so magical all at the same time? Who is she? Her mother's voice filled the air with words. She's a mother, a lawyer, a writer, a hero, a friend, a sister. She's inspirational, confident, dynamic, advocate, honest. She's a volunteer, a mentor, and she's hopeful. She is a queen, Parker whispered, and able to look away, to move, even to breathe. In that moment, Parker saw more than just a portrait. She saw a road before her with endless possibilities. Suddenly, Parker felt a small hand in hers, and the spell was broken. "Come on, Ava," she said, putting her arm around her little sister and standing tall. But Parker Curry was feeling powerful and strong, and even though she hadn't moved, inside, she was dancing. That is Parker Curry Looks Up. Very easy, very simple. It just makes it easy to do. And I love that about it. But also when I've been doing a lot of these things, I notice a lot of stuff comes up for parents. And one thing that I thought would be really fun to do, sharing, and look how cute that is. That's her. This is actually based on a real story. So it's its own voices. Yeah. But one thing too that I find is going back to stories we loved as children. And the stories that we were taught as children, that we loved as children, and looking at them with new eyes. This is one, Madeline. I'm sure are you guys all familiar with Madeline? Madeline, yeah, and Madeline is a beautiful story. It's a Caldecott winner. It was written in 1939. 39. And really, Madeline was very, very progressive for its time, about a strong young girl. And it's rhythmic, it's told very easily. The illustrations are a little bit different, but even a really simple story like this, in revisiting it, although it's like a beloved story, it does make you rethink certain norms and certain things that you could bring up with children. Like, wow, what would it be like living in a boarding school? Do you think the girls are happy? Probably. But wow, this is set in France. I bet there's lots of different colored people in France, and all we're seeing is white people. Huh, that's interesting. And we can talk about the different places in France, all the different things, and just the differences in this. Also class, if you notice, you know, wow, when she goes to the hospital, if I can get to it. Oh, but I do love how she says poo-poo, you know. Oh, she's a strong little girl. She says poo-poo to the tiger, you know it. But, and that, I like that she's strong there. I like that she's strong, but holy cow, when she goes to the hospital, her daddy gets her a dollhouse. Wow. You know, would you get a dollhouse if you had to go to the hospital? I don't know. I would. You know, like thinking about it in a broader level. Oh, Janet, help me out with this one. What do you think? Like well, just revisiting these stories.
Yeah. Well, when you think about one of the things that I would talk about is, you know, France, there are many people from Africa who are also citizens of France, because Senegal and Cameroon, and these are places that we might, you know, maybe why aren't those cultures, you know, why aren't we seeing those? But I would also ask too, there's so many religious differences. So in this story, most of the children, you know, are practicing a tradition of Catholicism, but, you know, talking to our children about there's lots of different ways that people worship and that people have identity. And in this one, this little girl might practice this tradition where someone wears something called a habit. But in some of our other stories, we might see someone who wears something else that's different, but also is religious, and that might be their hijab. And so
I love it.
About, you know,
simple, so simple.
Yes, so simple, but just to say that we see it. We see Madeline, we see that she wears a uniform. We see that, you know, there's someone who's making sure they're going different places and keeping them all together. And who is that person? What is their role? And what did her world look like? And does she have friends like yours? Does she have a classroom like yours? Do you have a lot of people from different backgrounds? You know, and so talking about it, that's one of my favorite characters when I was a kid too.
But I love that. I love, oh my gosh, Jenna, were you muted? No, you weren't the whole time. But I love thinking about, so this is the next breakout session, thinking about books you loved as a child and how you can rethink them. I always tell parents, read books you loved to your children. You know, your love of that book will transfer onto them. And when we rethink and have those broader conversations, like Parker Curry looks up, but also the books that you loved as a child. So Krissy, did you want to say anything?
Sure. Thank you so much, Melanie. So lovely. I'm gonna pop some suggested prompts in for our chat. I found those. But as with the previous breakout, please just do share whatever works for you and your group. I'm going to go ahead and split us into breakout rooms, and we'll probably have to make this one a little bit shorter. Which is a bummer because that's really great content that you've given us, Melanie. But we want to be sure that we have time to come back and have kind of an intentional reflection as a full group, and make sure that everybody gets a chance to have your nighttime milk and cookies before bed. So here we go with breakout rooms. And I think you'll probably be in the same group that you were in before. I've tried to mix it up. We'll see how it goes. Here we go. Now I'm gonna turn over the closing to Janet. I do want to mention just a couple of things. Again, just an acknowledgement and gratitude for the Boulder Library Foundation for supporting us. And then I think Janet can show us one or two closing slides, and I want to be sure that you're aware that we will be sending out a survey about this program and about the One Book program generally. So there is an opportunity for you to give specific feedback about tonight's workshop, but we're also very interested in your thoughts about the series. So I'm going to turn that over to Janet. Janet, you're muted right now.
Sorry. Oh, hold on. Did I unmute? Thank you.
Yeah, you did.
I just wanted to say thank you so much for all the ways that you have showed up in this space. It has been a beautiful, for me, and very generative space to be in tonight. And so I just wanted to share this quote. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move against domination, against oppression. The moment we choose to love, we begin to move towards freedom, to act in ways that liberate ourselves and others. That action is the testimony of love as the practice of freedom. And so just incredible bell hooks. We also will have a story time this Saturday. We'll be reading a story, and I'm so excited. I'll be using a new platform called StreamYard, or yeah, I think. And so we just want to thank you from the Boulder Library Foundation and the Boulder Public Library. There's a link there. There's more resources in the toolkit. I'm going to stop sharing real quick. And then I also want just to let you know that in our note catcher, we want you to just, if there's anything we can do to support this conversation and to continue to just be a resource, or if there's something that would be helpful to you, please, leave us that feedback in the note catcher. And just, we want to thank you so much. It's 8:01. I want to honor your time and just so much gratitude for you in the space tonight. So thank you.